after the unanimous federal court decision. It means the world number one won't be defending his Australian Open title. The country's Prime Minister Scott Morrison said Djokovic's deportation will keep Australians safe. The Prime Minister is reportedly planning a reshuffle of his cabinet as he fights back over the Downing Street party allegations. It comes as a growing number of Conservative MPs call for him to resign. The Sunday Times reports Boris Johnson is also planning a policy announcement blitz, including the lifting of remaining coronavirus restrictions in England, as he looks to survive the publication of Sue Gray's report. Conservative Party Chairman Oliver Dowden has rejected calls for the PM to stand down, but Labour leader Sir Keir Starmer says he's degraded the office and must go.
I think he broke the law. I think he's as good as admitted that he broke the law. And after all, Downing Street has now apologised to the Queen for some of the parties that have gone on. And I know that the government's holding position is let's all wait for the Sue Gray report. But I think it's pretty obvious what's happened. There's industrial scale partying that's been going on at Downing Street. Not much of it is really denied.
The Foreign Office has confirmed a hostage taker shot dead after a standoff at a Texan synagogue was British. He was killed following a 10-hour standoff, which ended after a SWAT team moved in. 4 hostages are safe and well. The suspect had been demanding the release of a Pakistani neuroscientist convicted of attempting to kill US Army officers in Afghanistan. Prince Harry is fighting a Home Office decision refusing to allow him to pay for his family's security while in the UK. Harry wants to bring his son Archie and baby daughter Lilibet to visit from the US, but claims it's too dangerous without police protection. He says his US security detail doesn't have sufficient jurisdiction or intelligence information in the UK. It follows an incident in London last year when his car was chased by paparazzi. The Home Office has refused to comment. 16 and 17-year-olds in England will be able to get a COVID booster jab from tomorrow. 40,000 teenagers will initially be eligible for their top-up dose, with that number rising to 600,000 in the coming weeks. Previously, boosters were only recommended for those who were clinically vulnerable. The Defence Committee chair has warned a Russian invasion of Ukraine is imminent and inevitable, following a build-up of military forces along the border. Conservative MP Tobias Ellwood made the claim in the wake of a cyber attack on Ukraine, which left parts of the country without heat, light and access to money. Russia has been accused of increasing tensions after placing more than 100,000 soldiers along its border with Ukraine. The Scottish Government has called for urgent action to reduce energy bills, including cutting VAT on fuel. Ministers in Edinburgh have written to the UK Government saying there should be targeted support for low-income households. They've asked for discussions ahead of an expected increase in the energy price cap in April. The Culture Secretary has indicated the BBC licence fee could be axed. Nadine Dorries tweeted the next announcement about the BBC licence fee will be the last. The comment comes amid reports the fee is expected to be frozen for the next 2 years. The Minister also indicated she wanted to find a new funding model for the BBC after the current licence fee deal expires in 2027. The extent of damage to Tonga caused by a tsunami remains unclear as a massive cloud of ash prevents surveillance flights from viewing the island nation. It follows an underwater volcanic eruption in the Pacific Ocean. The country is also largely uncontactable as telephone and internet links are down. The volcano erupted on Saturday, triggering warnings of 1.2-metre high waves. Well, this is GB News. More news as it happens. I'll be back at the top of the hour. Join us for that. Well, looking ahead to this evening's weather, in the UK will be dry with sunny spells for many, but cloudier in the south with some rain. Let's take a look at the details. It'll be a cloudier end to the day for the southwest, but there will be some clear spells, mostly dry, although the odd spot of rain is possible. The southeast of England will also end the day on a rather cloudy note with some light patchy rain or drizzle possible. Wales, however, will end Sunday dry with predominantly clear skies. There will be a light northerly breeze and temperatures will quickly fall away after dark. Skies will gradually clear across the Midlands this evening, leaving a dry picture. Although a little hill fog may linger for a time, it will also turn cold under the clearing skies. The northeast of England will end the day dry with almost completely clear skies as we head into the evening. Winds will be light and the temperatures will quickly fall away after sunset. There'll be a little more cloud over Scotland with the clearest skies towards the south and east. It will be rather windy in the north, turning coldest under clear skies. There will be mostly clear skies across Northern Ireland this evening, with the winds also falling light. Temperatures will quickly fall under the clear skies with a frost forming. Tomorrow, the nation will see cloud and rain, which will slowly clear the southeast. Elsewhere, there'll be light winds and clear skies, leading to a widespread frost. And that is how the weather is shaping up overnight into tomorrow morning.
Hello and welcome to the briefing with me, Tom Harwood. It's a momentous day in British politics and probably the most important Prime Minister's questions of this Prime Minister's premiership. Potentially the most important Prime Minister's questions of decades. There have been some suggestions this morning this is going to be the most important Prime Minister's questions at midday today since the Westland affair in the mid-1980s. There are many people saying that the Prime Minister's premiership is hanging in the brink. It all depends on how he responds to these allegations of a serious breach of coronavirus regulations in the summer of 2020 in the building behind me. How can the Prime Minister respond and can he recover? Well, let's talk now to Darren McCaffrey, political editor of GB News, about, first of all, the ire not just in the country but on the Conservative backbenches.
Yeah, indeed. Interesting this morning, of course, there was no minister, as there normally is, put up for the TV rounds. A sign maybe that actually very few ministers are prepared to go and defend the Prime Minister, particularly when they've got very little to say. We know to date, Downing Street's line is that they are not going to comment on any of this until Sue Gray, who's the senior civil servant carrying out an investigation, reports. Now, I think that line is unlikely to hold a Prime Minister's question time today. I think the Prime Minister is going to have to essentially say a lot more than he has done to date. And that is not least of all because, as you touched upon, there is an awful lot of frustration, frankly anger among Conservative backbenchers, that yet again we're back here with allegations of parties that took place in that building or in the garden behind that building. And they know that their constituents, large parts of them, are pretty angry about all of this. I think the calculation also that they're having to make is this going to end? Can the Prime Minister draw a line under this? Can his style of leadership, is it doing more damage now to the party and to the government? Essentially, could it cause them to potentially lose the next election or to lose lots of the seats at the next election? In saying that, as always, trying to get rid of a Prime Minister, and we're not at that point yet, it is not an easy task, as you well know, Tom. It's not easily done. It's not something any party ever wants to have to do. And that will be part of the calculus of where Tory MPs are at the moment in terms of the thought process about what may well happen. But you are entirely right in saying this PMQs is going to be crucial to mapping out the next couple of days and weeks for Boris Johnson.
And it's going to be very difficult to rely on this line that Sue Gray must investigate what happened and must investigate whether or not the Prime Minister himself was there. I suppose, very realistically, lots of people, and particularly perhaps the Leader of the Opposition, who we know is out of isolation today after 7 days after testing positive for coronavirus, he'll be able to say, Prime Minister, were you there or not? Yeah. And he can't just rely on Sue Gray.
Well, indeed, because why would you need an investigator to tell you whether you attended an event or not? I think the problem for the Prime Minister is he seems to be slightly snookered in whatever his answer is today. If, for example, he pursues that line of, well, I'm going to wait and see what Sue Gray has to say, that is not going to appease, not least the opposition, his own backbenchers, and indeed the public who are demanding answers now about something that happened, if you remember, in May 2020, something the Prime Minister should know wholly about, whether he was there or not. Second of all, if he does admit that he was there and apologises for it, which is what some Conservative MPs want him to do, to try and draw a line under that, that raises a whole load of other questions about whether he did break rules, but whether these guys, the Metropolitan Police, who are at each end of the street, knew about it, whether they would have to investigate it. Could the Prime Minister and others potentially face legal action? And so that's where he's in this really difficult position about what precisely does he do, or does he just try and brazen it out, which has to say has been the modus operandi of Downing Street to date. It has to a large degree worked, but what it's led to is this sense that the Prime Minister hasn't always been honest all of the time.
Now, I have to say that this party was almost 2 years ago. And all of these different stories of various Christmas events, of summer drinks, of all of these things that happened during lockdown, they've come out in drips and drabs. I suppose one of the big concerns is there anything more to come? Can the Prime Minister draw a line under this if something further comes down the line?
No, true, and we don't know where these stories have come from. Many of them, of course, have been scooped up by ITV. There are questions about, for example, Dominic Cummings' role in all of this. We know he is someone who mentioned this party last week. He is also someone who clearly wants to get revenge on the Prime Minister. And you're right, we do not know potentially if he or others have more information on other parties or other events or other things that happened in that place over the last couple of years that could do further damage. And in addition to that, we have got local elections coming up in May, and maybe the temptation for Tory MPs is to see how things play out over the next couple of weeks, but crucially to see how this actually affects the ballot box in reality. And looking at the polls at the moment, it's not looking great, must be said, for the Prime Minister. For example, here in London, suggestions the Tories could slump to the worst defeat in 50 years in council elections, and I think that could again be another crucial moment. Also interesting, talking to Tory MPs, what they're also concerned about, you know, if they did start to put in letters to the 1922 committee, and again I suggest we're not there yet, that if Boris Johnson were to win, we would end up in the situation where Theresa May was, in that there is a 12-month block on another leadership race, and so then you end up then getting in essentially to the general election territory, having tried to remove a leader who would then still be in position. And also, as always with leadership challenges, you know, who is there to replace him? It's not clear cut. There would have to be a challenge. Again, that is not easy to go through when you're in government. So PMQs crucial today. What the Prime Minister does is going to be crucial. And also that report from Sue Gray, and by all estimations she is not someone to roll over, someone who will be determined to try and get to the truth of what precisely did happen, not just, it must be said, in May 2020, but at a whole series of events in Downing Street and elsewhere in government, upwards of 12 throughout 2020, where many of us were essentially obeying the rules in lockdown.
What an extraordinary moment in our politics. Darren McCaffrey, thank you for that analysis.
Now, a YouGov poll published for The Times today is showing a pretty dramatic decline in support for the Conservative Party, and now a 10-point lead for Labour. It's the party's biggest lead since December 2013, nearly a decade ago, and it puts Labour's support at 38%, the Conservatives at 28%, and the Lib Dems doing pretty well at 13%. Let's get a view on all of this by joining John McTernan. He's a political strategist and was a Labour advisor. John, very good afternoon to you. This is clearly a significant lead for the Labour Party, though perhaps unsurprising. If they weren't doing well now, you'd have to raise some serious questions.
It's a very, very good result for Labour. And yes, it would be bad if Labour weren't doing well, but Labour were incredibly damaged in 2019. We mustn't forget the Prime Minister has an 80-seat majority. He won a landslide. He won ground in almost every Labour area across the country, apart from London. This is a remarkable turnaround in a very short period of time, just over 2 years since the election defeat of Jeremy Corbyn in the Labour Party. So it's more than simply a normal midterm. It's a massive recovery for Labour from the worst defeat since the 30s.
And now, John, you used to advise people like Tony Blair. What do you think Labour's strategy is about calling for the Prime Minister to resign? Because in some ways, when the opposition call for the leader or for the Prime Minister to resign, it makes it almost less likely, because it appears that you're caving in to what the opposition party wants. What do you think was going through the kind of special advisors and the advisors in the Labour Party, suggesting to Keir Starmer, Angela Rayner and others that they should call on the Prime Minister to resign?
So you'll see from the smaller parties, the Liberal Democrats and the SNP, there's an instinct to call for the Prime Minister's resignation on almost anything. And that is wrong. You become the patron saint of lost causes if you keep calling for resignation That's never going to happen. So what Labour have been doing is waiting until the moment. And the great thing about great barristers, and Sir Keir Starmer's a great barrister, is you don't hit the opponent every time they're weak. You hit them when they're at their absolute weakest and give them a decisive blow. And what Keir was actually saying, he was saying, and his advisor will have been advising him to do this, he was saying what the Tory backbenchers were thinking. So you're right, a call for resignation can unite the party. In this case, it's united the backbenchers of the Tory party going, yeah, that's what we think too. And I think as they go home this weekend to their constituencies, they'll be doing surgeries, they'll be in the high streets, and they'll be feeling the full force of public opinion. Everybody who I know who had a terrible, tragic event on the 20th of May, who's in my family circle and my broader friendship circle, are telling me what happened to them on the 20th of May 2020. We're going to see a lot of that happening to Tory MPs, and I think that they'll come back feeling the country has moved. And that's what Keir was putting, was that I'm saying what you're thinking. How are you going to do it now? Are you going to put the Prime Minister out of his misery, put the country out of its misery?
In saying that, there's a train of thought that may well suggest that actually Labour might be better with Boris Johnson, particularly a bloody and wounded Boris Johnson remaining as Prime Minister, rather than, you know, a fresh Prime Minister who might be significantly better in terms of opposition for Keir Starmer. Wouldn't it be better for Labour maybe to keep Boris Johnson in his job?
Look, I think in the end in politics, a scalp is a scalp. Politics is a contact sport. And you can't try and hold somebody in place because you think that the next person might be better. The thing is, if the Tories do replace him, it will be the fourth Prime Minister in 5 years. And that tells you something about the chaos inside the Tory party. That tells you something about a lack of stability. And that tells you about a party who at the next election are looking for an unprecedented fifth term in a row. There haven't been 5 terms in a row since we had democratic elections in the UK. They're tired out. It's time to have a rest. It's time to renew and refresh, absolutely. In opposition, that's what the voters do. And there comes a moment when the voters make their mind up about you. They did that with Gordon Brown. They gave him a chance. He could have had an election in 2007. He'd probably have won it or formed a government after it. He didn't. And people went, well, we're going to have to put you, we're going to have to put you into opposition while you sort your party out. It's taken us 10 years. We're back in the race now.
Quickly, John, though, but realistically, and you mentioned this earlier, talking about historic precedent, the Conservatives got an 80-seat majority. It would take a swing not seen since, I think, the Second World War, bigger than we saw in 1997, for Labour to win that election. That is too large a hill to climb, surely, in just a couple of years.
I think a majority is still hard to see. However, it takes a 10% swing for Labour to form a majority government. It takes 5% for the Tories to be in a place where they cannot form a minority government. That's the challenge for them. The SNP will never support a Tory government, so they've got a bigger hill to climb to maintain themselves in a winning position. So 5% swing, that's plausible. 10%, that looked like a dream until recently. This is a big, big gap now between Labour and the Tories. And the question the Tories will be asking themselves and their pollsters is this the floor? Have we hit the floor, or is there further to go?
Okay,
Theresa May went down to 17 at one point.
Okay, John, appreciate your time. John McTernan there joining us down the line, former Labour advisor. What do you think, Claire, Labour need to do to really capitalise on this?
I don't want to give them any advice, but I'll tell you what they shouldn't be doing is, well, one thing is Andrew Adonis, Lord Adonis, tweeted out saying end of Boris is end of Brexit. Well, actually, he's done Boris a lot of favours there, because it's actually rallied a lot of leavers around, and people are beginning to say, oh my God, if they're going for him because he's Brexit, that's bad, right? And secondly, I think that this idea that you should always just go for the rule breakers rather than the rules, I think it depends where the conversation lands. I think a lot of people are reassessing what the lockdown period was. And let me tell you, the Labour Party continue to be the most vociferous, most zealous restriction supporters. And they have to take some responsibility for what was happening on the 20th of May when people were desperately miserable and not being with their... because they advocated it. So I think they're being too smug. I thought John McTernan was rather complacent there.
Just very, very quickly, Tom. In saying that, there is a sense that Keir Starmer, who also didn't have a very easy 2021, it must be said, until towards the end, has in some ways stepped up to the mark to a degree, particularly at Prime Minister's Question Time, but not necessarily resonating with the public as much as he would hope.
Well, you're right. He was generally considered to have had a strong performance yesterday. The question is, how do they allow this moment to go on? Of course, we saw a similar dip in the polls for the Conservatives in December. By January, the first week in January, they had begun to tick back up in the polls. The Labour Party's challenge is that it's the Conservatives that are making mistakes, not necessarily the Labour Party that is capitalising on them in a long-term way. They need to have a long-term vision rather than just going for the moment, potentially setting out even some policy, dare I say it.
Oh, there we go. Tom Harwood, Claire Fox, thank you.
Hello there, I'm Eamon Holmes.
And I'm Isabel Webster.
And we hope you can join us for
Breakfast with Eamon.
And Isabel.
You make me laugh out loud, belly laugh.
Is that important first thing in the morning?
Yeah, absolutely.
And there's me trying to be deadly serious. News is a serious business.
Yeah, I have to rein you in sometimes.
Well, it doesn't stop us laughing at it. It doesn't stop us having an opinion on what's going on.
Yeah.
And it certainly will not stop us reflecting what you think.
Weekdays from 6 to 9:30 on GB News.
Hello there, I'm Eamon.
And I'm Isabel.
And you're watching the GB News digital stream across the United Kingdom.
And around the world.
If you're here in the UK, you can also watch us on your TV screen. GB News is Freeview channel 236.
On Sky, we're channel 515.
626 on Virgin Media.
Just remember, you might need to retune your TV to watch the channel.
Yeah, and if you are doing that, find out more about retuning by going to gbnews.uk.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday. And there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Hello there, I'm Eamon Holmes.
And I'm Isabel Webster.
And we hope you can join us for
Breakfast with Eamon.
And Isabel.
You make me laugh out loud, belly laugh.
Is that important first thing in the morning?
Yeah, absolutely.
And there's me trying to be deadly serious. News is a serious business.
Yeah, I have to rein you in sometimes.
Well, it doesn't stop us laughing at it. It doesn't stop us having an opinion on what's going on.
Yeah.
And it certainly will not stop us reflecting what you think.
Weekdays from 6 to 9:30 on GB News.
It's 4.5 years since the horror of the Grenfell Tower fire, and at last it seems help is coming for some leaseholders. Owners of flats between 11 and 18 metres have been facing crippling bills to fix something which wasn't their fault. But Michael Gove will announce a £4 billion package today, and the government plans to make developers pay for their work. Joining me now is Conservative MP for Stevenage, Stephen McPartland. He led a rebellion against the fire safety bill backed by 31 other Tories. It's good to see you. Thank you for coming in the studio today.
Good to see you, Gloria.
So we will be hearing from Michael Gove about 3:30, we think, in the House of Commons this afternoon. You've been a vocal critic of the government's inaction on dangerous cladding. Is he going to say enough this afternoon to get you on side?
Well, he's going to say almost enough to get us on side. He's actually done a very good job. He's listened with us. He's worked constructively with us. We're now up to the level of £9 billion to support leaseholders. So today is going to be another big victory for leaseholders, another step on the way. But I still need to see, so I need a bit more reassurance, as do my colleagues. And there are two areas that we're very concerned about. So the first is cladding is an external fire safety defect, but there are also internal fire safety defects, such as missing fire breaks. Now, as we've seen with the terrible events overnight in New York, missing fire breaks are incredibly important because they stop fire spreading from flat to flat inside, and they were also the responsibility of developers. So we need clarification that this money is also going to go after the developers for internal as well as external fire safety.
Now, Matthew Pratt, the chief executive of house builder Redrow, said you can't keep putting all the responsibility for this on developers. Now, you might say, well, he would say that, wouldn't he? But surely these builders must have been following building regulations, and if they weren't tough enough, then isn't that the fault of politicians?
Well, this is something we've spoken to Michael about a great deal because he has been listening and working with us on this. And there is the reality that some of these buildings were actually probably built illegally. They have missing fire breaks, which according to the design guidance should have been there. And there is an issue around the regulatory regime and then enforcement over it. So what we're going to hear today is very positive for leaseholders, but they've been in a very difficult position for many years and our buildings are not safe.
And the question that the campaign groups have is whether this is a partial solution to the problem. End Our Cladding Scandal campaign group spokesperson put it like this: the government is still focusing on cladding, but they know full well it goes beyond that and people are still facing life-changing costs. And it's, as you say, leaseholders and builders with other fire safety problems. Are you going to seal the deal on that, or are these campaign groups right to be concerned that it's not going to be the full deal?
Oh, no, I mean, we've worked with them for over 12 months, and I remember one of the first comments we did to launch it was, I asked the previous Secretary of State to, get out of the ivory tower, stop talking and start helping. And I think we're in a position where we're £9 billion on in terms of help and support, and people understand a lot more about the issue. But, a lot of our buildings are safe, and there's been a lot of gold plating, and some of our buildings are not safe. And what Michael's going to try and do is work with us and the cladding groups. And I know we will have met the cladding groups today to ensure that there's good communication, good conversations, and we focus our energies on those buildings that are not safe and get them safe for those leaseholders.
The Treasury has made clear that there won't be any new money to remove cladding. So if Michael Gove's plans don't work, he's put the developers on notice that they're going to have to foot the bill. But, for example, what if they say, well, no, then that means cuts in the levelling up budget if it has to come from inside the budget. Is that likely to be to happen? Because, of course, those new voters that you got, they need that money spent in those areas, don't they?
Oh, yeah, very much so. So the £5 billion come from the Treasury. This is an additional £4 billion. And one of the things that we've always asked for is for the government to put the money up front and then claim it back from the developers. So in fairness, Michael's doing what myself and the leaseholder groups have actually asked for over all these months. So I think the developers will cough up because it's going to be in their interest. If they don't, the Treasury have said we can use the tax system to go after them for it.
And final question to you. It's more than 4 years since Grenfell. Those images will haunt us all forever. Why has it taken so long to get to this place?
I genuinely don't know. I mean, one of the things that I found incredibly frustrating all the way through was that everybody we spoke to and tried to work with within government and civil service, within the industries, they just continued to make the problem bigger and bigger and bigger, and it got harder and harder. But, instead of it being we're trying to fix 3 or 4 problems, it became fixing 300 or 400 problems. So many things got pulled in. And one of the things Michael has done is actually sat down and tried to work with us to iron out what are the real issues and how can we deliver for leaseholders.
Stephen McPartland, Conservative MP for Stevenage. Real pleasure to have you on the show today. I hope we see you again. And
Thanks, Gloria.
I hope you hear everything you want to hear this afternoon
Me
in the
too.
statement. Thanks very much.
Until the full conclusion of the inquiry, until the full facts are brought before this House, Mr. Speaker, and he will then have an opportunity to put his points again.
There you go, that was Boris Johnson, the Prime Minister, at PMQs a little earlier on today, answering questions from Sir Keir Starmer, who was essentially asking for the Prime Minister to resign amidst all of this. Delighted to say that joining me outside Parliament is the Labour MP, Rosie Duffield, who's the MP for Canterbury. Rosie, very good afternoon. Thank you for joining us. First of all, is it going a little far to call for the Prime Minister to resign when we do know this investigation is being carried out and there are still lots of questions to answer?
Absolutely, we do need to hear exactly what happened, and that investigation should reveal some of the answers to the questions that people have been asking. But when Kent MPs, who are all Tory apart from me, and some of the most supportive of Boris Johnson are also echoing the call for resignation, I think it is time for him to seriously consider his position.
In saying that, when we look at the detail of what has happened here, this is potentially a work event, and we have to understand that Downing Street is not like any other workplace. You know, it is also the Prime Minister's home, but it is where hundreds of people work, and there is a possibility of confusion about what may have happened on that day.
Yeah, I mean, that's a good point. It isn't like normal working. We don't go in at 9 and go home at 5, but none of my team were even able to see each other. We did everything on Zoom at that time. We certainly weren't sharing bottles of wine together, and it also begs the question for me, well, we were all tallying up those numbers of NHS workers and constituents who were losing their lives. What exactly did Downing Street have to celebrate? It seems really tasteless, and I think there needs to be questions answered.
And just in terms of those questions, we know that this is investigation being carried out by Sue Gray. Is your expectation that in the end, whatever she concludes, the Prime Minister needs to obey?
Yeah, I think he hasn't got a choice now. We know that the 1922 committee are receiving more letters, you know, probably every hour of today, I would imagine, as people wrestle with their conscience about supporting this Prime Minister. So I think he is going to have to abide by the conclusions of that report, absolutely.
What would you say, though, to constituents, and indeed there are many viewers of this channel and elsewhere who feel that, you know what, this is all a big distraction. This happened nearly 2 years ago. There were bigger issues in the country, whether it's the cost of living crisis, whether it's possible, you know, Russia invading Ukraine. And here we are talking about a party in Downing Street that doesn't really have consequence for most people across the country. And Labour will be better placed trying to hold the government to account on the big issues of the day.
Yeah, I mean, we're trying to do those things as well. We were doing them yesterday, talking about VAT on fuel bills and the cost of living. But I think the key thing is that this man is supposed to be leading the country on all of those issues. How do we put our faith in him as the leader of this country and the leader of the government if he can't be trusted to tell the truth about things like parties and things like rule breaking? So I think it is really important, actually, that we look and get those answers, particularly before the big inquiry about COVID, which is just down the line. So we need those answers now.
What are you hearing from your constituents? Because it's often really interesting is that MPs receive lots of emails and letters every day. You're there to represent 70,000, 80,000 people. I mean, is this a story that's getting people animated?
Yes, what I've been interested in, and I think other MPs have echoed this when we've been talking, is that people who don't normally contact their MP about issues, they're not especially politically engaged, have all been outraged. All the emails have been cross and angry. People who were broadly supportive of the Conservatives or Boris Johnson before this have been really cross and have felt moved to write in, and it takes quite a lot to kind of look up your MP and how to contact them. And people who've never contacted me about anything else have been contacting me about this, so it's really cut through to the general public.
And have you heard stories in which people have obviously made sacrifices?
Yeah, absolutely.
And feel quite aggrieved about it?
Yeah, I think people do all relate it to where they were on that day and what was happening to them and their family, and it brings it all back, and it's really hurt people, I think.
Yeah. Just in terms of the questions that are outstanding, you know, the Prime Minister's making this point that, you know, he was there. In retrospect, he regrets that the party went ahead and that he kind of misjudged it as a work event. I mean, I come back to this point. Fundamentally, that is entirely possible. It is entirely plausible that that is the case. And so, why are you calling for him to resign? Shouldn't we wait for that investigation?
I think we are waiting, but I think that everything that's happened, we've also got the High Court ruling that came through today to say that his government awarded contracts to friends and they weren't supposed to do that. So I think all of these things together with the general inquiry are what's putting pressure on him to resign. But yeah, you're right, of course we need to wait for that inquiry and what it finds.
OK, Rosie Duffield,
Thank you.
Appreciate it. MP there, the Labour MP for Canterbury, joining me outside Parliament. Lots of you been getting in touch. As always, you know the email address by now, gbviews@gbnews.uk, or indeed tweet us. I'm Darren McCaffrey, and join me on The Briefing Monday to Thursday at 3 p.m. You'll get your afternoon fix of all the latest political stories, debate and analysis, as well as interviews with some of the biggest names in UK politics.
It's a problem that affects the whole world, Darren.
From Westminster to Cardiff, Edinburgh and Belfast, if it's happening in UK politics, we've got it covered. That's The Briefing with me, Darren McCaffrey, Monday to Thursday, 3 p.m. on GB News.
Hello there, I'm Eamon.
And I'm Isabel.
And you're watching the GB News digital stream across the United Kingdom.
And around the world.
If you're here in the UK, you can also watch us on your TV screen. GB News is Freeview channel 236.
On Sky, we're channel 515.
626 on Virgin Media.
Just remember, you might need to retune your TV to watch the channel.
Yeah, and if you are doing that, find out more about retuning by going to gbnews.uk.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday, and there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilized conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Hello there, I'm Eamon Holmes.
And I'm Isabel Webster.
And we hope you can join us for
Breakfast with Eamon.
And Isabel.
You make me laugh out loud, belly laugh.
Is that important first thing in the morning?
Yeah, absolutely.
And there's me trying to be deadly serious. News is a serious business.
Yeah, I have to rein you in sometimes.
Well, it doesn't stop us laughing at it. It doesn't stop us having an opinion on what's going on.
Yeah.
And it certainly will not stop us reflecting what you think.
Weekdays from 6 to 9:30 on GB News. Welcome back. A new opinion poll puts Labour 10 points ahead of the Conservatives. Have voters had enough of Boris Johnson? Well, to discuss that, I'm delighted to be joined by the one, the only, Sir John Curtis, polling guru and politics professor at the University of Strathclyde. John, as ever, it is a pleasure to see you. Today's YouGov poll, 10 points behind Labour, the Conservatives are. That last happened in December 2013, when, as we all know, the Tories went on to win a majority. So should we all calm down?
Well, first of all, to say that the real story of that poll is not some dramatic rise in Labour support. It's up by 1 point, which statistically means 0. What the poll is showing is a 5-point drop in Conservative support as compared with a week ago, though that probably only represents a couple of points drop on the position just before Christmas. So this poll at least is of a piece with what we learned from what we might now call Partygate 1.0. That is the whole furore instigated by the now infamous video featuring Allegra Stratton, the Prime Minister's former press secretary, which started this whole thing going. That whole episode cost the Tories 5 or 6 points. It had looked as though before that email arose earlier this week suggesting that there was a party in May 2020. The poll suggested that the Tories were recovering and got at least 2 or 3 points of that back. Well, YouGov are basically suggesting that the Tories are now in even deeper trouble. Now, it has to be said, there is now a second poll out from Focal Data, which has been done, unlike the YouGov poll, wholly since yesterday. That actually only shows a 1-point drop in Conservative support, though even in this poll, because it puts Labour higher, the Tories are still 9 points behind. So I think we still have to be careful about saying that the latest 48 hours or so have put the Conservatives in even deeper water than they were before Christmas, but certainly probably any hopes that there were that the quietude of the festive season meant that the Tories were recovering, probably that at least is for the time being at least not the case. Other things that, again, come out now from all the polling we have seen, which again really has to worry the Conservatives. We've now got a couple of polls, including the Focal Data poll, that suggests that Conservative voters, those who voted for Boris Johnson in 2019, are now evenly divided as to whether or not he should resign. So we're not just talking about opposition voters saying he should go. We are now seeing a significant section of Conservative support from 2 years ago saying he should go. And of course, it's the extent to which that seeps into then a reluctance to vote for the party. That's one of the things that's probably going to determine Boris Johnson's fate.
Last election, the voters swung violently to the Tories. How likely is it that they could swing just as likely back again to Labour at the next election? I suppose my point is, was the last election just a totally unique one-off event because of Brexit?
Well, if we start from the premise that the reason why the Conservatives won in 2019 because of the Prime Minister's popularity amongst Leave voters, because that's the people who voted for him, and his ability to strike a revised deal with the European Union that enabled him to argue that Brexit was ready to be done. It was oven ready. Now we can argue about whether that was true or not, but that's what he was able to do. So in other words, Boris Johnson's personal popularity and his ability to sell himself to the electorate was central to the Conservative success. The problem that the Prime Minister has at the moment is, to put not too fine a point on it, is that very few people believe him. Again, the YouGov poll this morning suggests that about 2/3 of Conservative voters don't think he's telling the truth. We had a lot of that from the earlier polls in December, with a half of Conservative voters saying that. And amongst voters in general, again, focal data, they showed the PMQs to people, they showed the apology. Only 24% think it's sincere. So the question that's perhaps really crucial is whether or not the damage done to people's views about the Prime Minister's honesty, his credibility and his probity, done not just by Partygate, but also the Owen Paterson effect, because that's where this started, is whether or not the damage that's been done is, in a sense, irrecoverable. And if the damage to Boris Johnson's personal standing is irrecoverable, then he's not necessarily going to be in a very good position to turn his party's fortunes around. So that, I think, certainly is the challenge facing the Prime Minister. It is worth remembering that it is relatively rare for a politician, once they become deeply unpopular, even if they once were popular, to recover. Tony Blair never recovered from Iraq. And in a sense, the question is now, Boris Johnson, can he recover from Partygate?
And is there anybody waiting in the wings who could recover the fortunes of the Tory parties? Briefly, if you would.
Well, certainly the one member of Cabinet who's got a reasonably high degree of public visibility and who seems to be relatively popular amongst the public in general is the Chancellor, Rishi Sunak. And I think many people would argue that he certainly is an extremely articulate public performer. Of course, it's often thought that if there were to be a contest, it would be a contest between him and Liz Truss, the Foreign Secretary. Now, Liz Truss is frankly, A, not so well known amongst the general public, and B, is not as popular as the Chancellor amongst the general public. But of course, it's not the general public who will be the selectorate. If there were to be another contest, it would ultimately be Conservative members. And amongst Conservative members at the moment, Liz Truss is rather more popular than Rishi Sunak, though both are pretty high in the surveys that are run by the Conservative Home website.
So interesting. As ever, Professor John Curtis, we're so grateful for your time, your expertise and your insights and wisdom. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Now it is time for the latest in my series of interviews with MPs, where we go behind the politics and get to know the real person. I talked to Peter Bone, Conservative MP for Wellingborough.
When I think of Peter Bone, I think of one of the Tory party's awkward squad. Am I being unfair?
I think that's I like that description. I've always been the rebel, from school days, when there was this big debate that, well, we should have a school council, and I was the only one out of 400 people who thought we should have it, but I still stood up and said we should have it. So yeah, I think I just like to stick up for what I think's right.
Is it just your personality? So you've always been like that, you say?
Yeah, I think so. I think all the way back, it's sort of the cause. If it doesn't matter what other people are saying, don't go with the crowd, do what you think is right. And that's what I've tended to try and do.
You're a whip's nightmare, aren't you?
I hope so. That's entire. Whips should be, in my view, abolished. I mean, I'm not elected to do what someone else called a whip tells me to do. That's a ridiculous idea, isn't it? You're elected to Parliament to represent your constituents, not to do as some whip tells you. So 99% of the time, I guess, my view, my constituents' view and the party view are aligned. But if they're not, I'm going to put my constituents above my party.
Do the whips even bother talking to you ahead of a difficult vote anymore?
Yes, sometimes I'm actually useful for them when they want me to force a division on the other side, so which we did recently. So yeah, no, I have no problem with the whips. I just think the idea that you get elected to Parliament, all that hard work to get there, for someone else to tell you which way to vote, it's a bit of a nonsense.
Let's talk about your childhood. Was it a happy childhood?
It was a happy childhood. I grew up a council house, and my father was a council officer, and eventually we finished up in Harlow, and that was Labour controlled, strong Labour area, always going to be Labour in those days, and so it wasn't really too useful for him to have a 14-year-old who had just written a school project saying how wonderful the Conservatives are. There was 2 local papers, and they, Peter has his eye on number 10. And then we left. We moved to Southend-on-Sea when I was about 15, and that's really my home in many regards. And where Southend West, actually, the great David Ames. In fact, David Ames, who was terribly murdered just a little while ago, I was in the selection with David for that Southend West seat, and David went in before me. And you must know what it's like with a selection. You hardly get any reaction. David had them laughing, and they gave him a standing ovation. And then I had to go in afterwards.
That's awful.
But it's no. So Southend West was where I sort of flourished as politically. I was the youngest councillor in the country on Southend-on-Sea County Borough. Became, in fact, deputy chairman of the Southend West Conservatives. So that's where I sort of moved forward.
Have you ever questioned your conservatism, your membership of the Conservative Party? That's a
different thing, isn't it? I've never questioned about being a Conservative. I sometimes wondered on occasions when the Conservative Party was being Conservative, and I can think of times under John Major where I had some doubts about that. But no, I've never doubted the principles that's behind the Conservative Party is what I believe in and what I try and put forward.
And when there was a couple of defections to UKIP during that period, you never contemplated?
No, I never. I was never even approached on that. But I do remember one Saturday when I was out knocking on doors with Tom Perslove, actually the MP for Corby, and we were campaigning as we always are on Saturday. Well, there was this news story that I was about to defect, about to appear from behind a curtain somewhere or other. But no, that never happened. And I know Nigel Farage very well because I worked with him on Grassroots Out, and I absolutely agree with him on Europe and many other things. But I've always believed in staying in the Conservative Party to get the Conservative Party to change. We did get it to change, and we did get Brexit.
What did that mean to you, getting Brexit?
It was the single biggest thing and most important thing politically to do. I mean, this goes back to David Cameron's days when a small group of us organised a rebellion where 83 Conservatives voted against a heavy three-line whip, to vote for having a referendum. And I think that was the start of the process that got us the referendum. And then, of course, I formed with Tom Perslove our own campaign group to leave the EU called Go, Grassroots Out, which in the end, Nigel Farage and UKIP supported, and we had Kate Hoey from Labour supporting it, and Sammy Wilson, DUP. It was real cross-party grassroots move. And we nearly became the official designated Leave group, which we would have done better if we'd been the official group.
Do you know, listening to you just prompted me to ask a question. Right, you've got to have one person round for tea, Nigel Farage or David Cameron. Who are you inviting round for tea?
Oh, well, it would certainly be more fun to have Nigel Farage, and I'd be more in. But I've had tea with Nigel Farage, and Yeah, I think perhaps had tea once. Actually, I did have. I remember sitting in the tea room next to David Cameron when we were having tea, and he said to me, you know, we're just chatting, and I said, "Oh, isn't it great? We've got this backbench business committee. We can put on substantive debates in the chamber. We can force votes." And he spluttered his tea out at that very moment. So I have had tea with David Cameron, but of the two, Nigel Farage.
Right, a personal question now. Your marriage broke down a few years ago. You don't have to talk about anything you feel uncomfortable with, but would you like to tell me about the impact of your marriage breakdown without upsetting anybody who may be involved?
No, well, my marriage broke down, and as many do actually in politics, but this was more also from the pressure that my family was under by a false allegation made by a council, which has now since been dissolved, and also someone was in court afterwards to deal with the issue. But that put a lot of pressure on Jenny and me, and we just grew apart. Now, Jenny is still my office manager, and we're still, in fact, I think we probably both agree we're better friends now that we're not living together. So it's actually worked out for the best. But I know many colleagues have had divorces through their time as MPs. It is very pressurised.
It's amazing that she still is your office manager. Because you rarely hear about marriage breakups that end amicably, but I can't think of a more amicable relationship than still wanting to work with somebody every day.
Oh no, we just grew out of love, really, and it was better for us not to live in the same house but be friends, and we're very, very good friends. And she, as I say, still runs the Wellingborough office.
And you're happily in a new relationship now?
Yes, a couple of years after that, I met Helen, who I think you know because she stood against you in Ashfield. And,
in 2017.
Yeah, so she's doing really well, and she's now a councillor senior councillor in Northampton, and it's worked for us.
You seem very happy, even when I sort of ask you about things which may trouble some MPs, like rebelling or, you seem quite a cheery person. But your constituency office was graffitied, a matter of weeks, months ago. That's really not a nice thing to happen. What was the impact on you and your staff?
Well, the problem is the staff, and it's mainly Jenny, because she's the person in that office, Monday to Friday. But it wasn't just that. I mean, we've had death threats. We've had a picture of my eldest son being executed on social media. We've had someone convicted for harassment. We've had a house attacked. These are the sort of things that isn't limited to me. Of course, many MPs go through this, but it's not fair. Not fair. It shouldn't happen anyway. But it shouldn't happen to your family, because my family's got nothing to do with the way I vote, and it's outrageous and obscene. And social media has got a lot to do with it. I mean, by the time this is broadcast, I look on my social media and there'll be people saying all sorts of rude and nasty things.
Peter, so you got elected in 2005. Track for me in that, 17 years?
Yeah.
The levels of abuse as since you came into Parliament and what you put that down to.
Going back then, it was really, really mild. I mean, you wouldn't get the stuff. But as social media developed, the idea that people can, call you a racist or want to kill your children or shout at you in the street, all those things now happen, and it's definite. I mean, one of the things I would do is remove the fact that you can't tell who's someone who's tweeting something. You should be able to source that so you can take them to court for what they're saying. At the moment, they say awful things which stirs other people up.
Yeah.
And I think we've all suffered from that, and it's not a good thing. And we've got to do we have to do something to make sure that people can't say things that are untrue and vicious just because they're hidden and you don't know who they are.
There's abuse and there's serious threats. Do you think any of the threats that have been made to you or your family have been ones that the police have needed to be involved in?
Well, obviously the one where the person was convicted, absolutely, convicted for harassment. That person threatened myself and my children. Mind you, I wouldn't say this never happened in the past, because in 1992 I stood against Neil Kinnock in Islay, and I got the best Conservative result ever there. I only lost by 36,000, and that actually is true. But Jenny's told me one, and we had young children then, and Jenny said one day, "Look, Peter, I haven't told you, I've had death threats." Oh, God, you know. But I said, the reason I'm telling you, we now had death threats against the children as well. And great credit to Neil Kinnock and his office. We immediately rang the Labour office and said, this has happened. They put a statement out saying it was appalling, and it stopped overnight. So, but that was a rare incident, really rare. These ones now are serious, and the fact that, you know, you can have your house attacked. Well, 3 times I had to dial 999 in my constituency surgeries in 1 year. 3 times. That can't be right.
Why?
Well, because of the threat level, and
somebody
scary.
was in that surgery,
Yeah.
which was alarming you.
Oh, more than alarming. You know, and sometimes, you know, I have staff with me from London,
Yeah.
who were, you know, young people, and so we take a different approach to how we deal with surgeries, and there's additional security as well now, which helps.
Peter Bone, we're coming to the end of our chat. Didn't that fly?
It really did, and it's important that people realise, I think, that, you know, politicians are human beings, and, you know, the level of abuse that is thrown at us would never be acceptable in any other walk of life. So if we can do anything to stop that or reduce it, then we should.
I don't think there's been a more important time to reveal that, which is why part of the reason why we do these interviews, to demonstrate that very truth. Thank you, Peter Bone. Thank you.
I'm Darren McCaffrey, and join me on The Briefing Monday to Thursday at 3 p.m. You'll get your afternoon fix of all the latest political stories, debate and analysis, as well as interviews with some of the biggest names in UK politics.
It's a problem that affects the whole world, Darren.
From Westminster to Cardiff, Edinburgh and Belfast, if it's happening in UK